If you've been thinking about starting a ketogenic diet, I encourage you to just do it. Yes, you are the reason why I started this podcast in the first place. More than anything else, I love to empower people to take responsibility for their own health. And for so many people, a ketogenic diet is the most effective way to reverse metabolic dysfunction, which is the very foundation of all chronic illness. But to do this effectively, you need 3 specific tools or you're going to struggle and you won't see results. I do not want this to happen to you. So I give you these 3 tools in my free ebook, How to Start a Keto Diet. And you can go download your free copy right now at radicalhealthmakeover.com. I am thrilled to introduce you to my very special guest today, Lauren Meadowsweet. Lauren is a certified functional nutritional therapy consultant and a GAPS practitioner. GAPS stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. Her most notable accomplishments have been getting herself out of a housebound, bedridden state by dialing in the power of food and completely restoring her microbiome. Initially, she thought she was healing from a record-breaking pesticide toxicity, but then she recently learned that she was actually dealing with stage 3 cancer the whole time. Since officially learning about her cancer diagnosis, she's also begun to specialize in a gut healing, microbiome restoring version of the ketogenic diet protocol. Using food and lifestyle practices, her cancer continues to heal without chemotherapy or any conventional pharmaceuticals of any kind.
I've just gone through such a profound transition in my healing journey. So, kind of how it started was, gosh, I mean, you could be like, oh, it like started with my grandma and what she ate or whatever. But for simplicity's sake, I feel like really my trajectory and when I started getting noticed from the outside world and really documenting my journey was 2 to 3 years ago. However, I had really been on the GAPS nutritional protocol I've been on it for over 6 years at this point. And just kind of like all of us, I was on like my own personal journey of really fine tuning things, going deeper, really like getting access to information that would like lift me and help me. And it all came crashing down. It was November of 2019. I just completely, my body just like refused to keep working and I became housebound. I became bedridden. I had just finished GAPS practitioner training, I think the year prior, and I had become a certified nutritional therapist. So I had a lot of experience at this point, had a lot of training. My like official, like on paper background is like I graduated with honors in environmental science, and kind of like the lens that I look at everything now is through like, okay, like I was trained to restore ecosystems, external ecosystems, and really my life's work has actually been to turn inward and restore internal ecosystems. And that's like where life comes from, and that's how we heal the planet, and that's how what we eat heals the planet or contributes to this collective healing. I think that, if you find this episode, I think we're all kind of on that journey and we're searching for. So November 2019 was an opportunity to really get specific, and I didn't have any excuse anymore to ignore everything that I knew, but also kind of what I didn't know. I needed answers so terribly, and I partnered with a pretty famous GAPS practitioner. She's well renowned. Her name is Dr. Becky Plotner. And we found that really the root cause of my issue was more pesticide than she had ever seen in anyone by like 100-fold. She said that she'd never seen numbers close to this high. And so that began my journey of really detoxing and supporting my body through these detoxification processes, but also introducing healing foods and modalities that would kind of serve as a cleanup crew. And my understanding of the human body deepened so profoundly during that experience. Now, fast forward to like 2 years later, and I'm doing really well. I still, through becoming housebound and bedridden and all of that, I was very dependent on other people to take care of me, physically and financially, and went through profound life transitions, as most of us do when we really start advocating for myself ourselves. And um you know, I was with a partner slash fiance at the time, and was brave enough to leave after, you know, feeling strong enough. And but then I moved back in with my parents, you know, as a, I think I was 31 at the time, or a 30-year-old lady. And so just incredibly humbled by this entire experience, right? And kind of realizing like my part in my life, but that there's only so much we can control. And so just I think what helped me emotionally was just consistently showing up for it. Like whatever I needed to do, I was going to do it. And I had improved so much at that time that I moved out of my parents' house, and but I was still having trouble chelating. So I think a lot of us at this point might know what chelating is, but just for people who don't, it's you're removing metals from your body, and pesticides are incredibly high in metals. And so I have a very high metal load as well. And any time I would put a speck of a chelator on, it was on the inside of my ankle, I would have profound reactions that would take me like 8 months to recover from. And so I know. And basically the next step was to test for cancer. And I still working with Becky Plotner. And anyone who's followed her journey, she's actually healing herself from stage 4 breast cancer. And so I went to her and I was like, hey, like I've had a lump in my breast since I was 26. I'm 32 now. And I went to the doctor when at the time, and they said it was nothing, and they said it was okay. But I'm really starting to wonder, you know, if this could be contributing to, you know, I've had so much success, but I'm really getting stuck when I'm trying to detox any further. Could this be aggravating a tumor? Because through internal ecosystem lens, what they find in the center of tumors are metals, pesticides, Lyme spirochetes, which I also had Lyme disease. And Becky's like, I mean, you have all of those things. And I was ready for her to tell me, like, you're young, like, don't worry about it. Of course, you don't have cancer. Cancer doesn't happen to people like you know? But she was like, oh, yeah, that's a really good point. Here's what you need to do to see if you have cancer. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see my entire experience with using black salve and what exactly black salve is. It's incredibly unconventional and controversial, and I feel like I just kind of want to like make a nest in that spot now of like, yeah, the way I go about things is really different. And I've experienced so much healing and so much like profound life changes that like in my quality of life, my life just keeps on getting better. And so i'm I'm like sticking my flag in this place of like, yeah, the way I do things is unconventional. The way I approach my healing is different, and it's the best. These are the best decisions I've ever made. And so, yeah, basically, what happened 3 months ago now, almost 4, is that I pulled a tumor out of my breast with black salve, and it was cancerous. And we learned that there's indication through thermographic imaging that there are tumors not only in my right breast where I pulled the tumor out, but also that spread to my left and up. So, like in my shoulder, which would qualify as stage 3 breast cancer. And that's kind of where I'm at in my journey right now. It's really funny that we cross paths, Mary, because you're really into the ketogenic protocol and like the ketogenic version of GAPS. And I'm like, oh, what a like a timely meeting, because my understanding of the body has only deepened, and I feel like my entire like perspective and my world has just like exploded with. I feel like so inspired now just by everything that I'm continually learning, and really just like up leveling my practice as a practitioner, but also just as a human who's like on this healing journey. And so yeah, I guess that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then also just want to speak to this kind of unconventional approach, and just dealing with the outer society or mainstream world, as it were. I did not get any support from my family and the approach that I wanted to take. And so felt really scared and insecure for a while, but I have enough time has passed. I guess it has been 4 months, because on month 3, every 3 months, I get thermographic imaging to see how my cancer is doing, and the tumors are already shrinking. So it's really exciting. It's a testament to how powerful nutrition really is, and how when you dial it in, like the world is your oyster and anything is possible. And so I just want to bring that message forward too. It's like, yeah, like you might be a weirdo, but you might be right. And really just honoring, like, I think also the energetic of like continually being a student, um, and not getting caught up in like, oh, I've like done so much healing, like I don't need to learn anything else, which is honestly, I went through a little phase like that. I was like, I'm good, I'm done. And it's like, no, like all of our paths are continuously unfolding, and what an opportunity it is to really show up for yourself. And when people tell you that there's no hope or whatever, just don't believe them, because I have found that that has not been true. And yeah, that's where I'm at in my journey right now.
Wow. That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So we have a lot in common. We are both GAPS, certified GAPS practitioners. So GAP stands for gut and psychology syndrome. This was a modality that was long since created and established by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She wrote a book called Gut and Psychology Syndrome. She's written many other books as well. And her claim to fame was really working with autistic children. And this began for her almost 40 years ago, around 40 years ago, I believe. So she's been at this for a long time, really explaining in detail and helping people heal their gut and brain. And so she's been a hugely inspiring and instrumental figure in my journey, and many people that I know as well. And the whole premise is that our gut and brain are connected, and our gut is the epicenter of all inflammation and degeneration, and all of the our immune system is in our gut. So I'm a huge proponent of gut healing, and I'm curious about, and you're all, and so our other commonality is the ketogenic diet. I was reading about your exposure to that a little bit. So tell us a little bit more. So you're doing GAPS, which is a gut healing diet, and it's also, for many people, it begins very much in a carnivore a carnivorous way, you could say. And so this is really going back to the basics, really just putting in the elements and the minerals and the nutrients that our gut needs to heal very deeply. This has to do with eliminating all plants that contain toxins, right? So some people, like you said, you were exposed to toxins maybe when you were a young child. Who knows where they came from? Pesticides, heavy metals, all of these things are in the air we breathe, the water we drink. Sometimes the environment that we live in is toxic with mold, or, like you said, a tick bite. It doesn't matter what triggers these things. These are all accumulations that need to get removed from the body. And to really open those detox pathways, as you mentioned, one of the most profound ways to do that is through therapeutic nutritional ketosis, right? So we can open these detox pathways in such a profound way. And this is something that triggers autophagy and mitophagy, where the body really goes in and starts cleaning up these old mutated DNA and cells that are no longer needed or can't really work to their full capacity. And our body was perfectly designed to do this. But most of the time, we're not living in a state of ketosis or autophagy, right? So we're sort of trading that for a feasting state that most people live in all the time. So I'm a huge proponent of teaching people how to get their body into ketosis so that they can trigger this really intense detoxification pathways. So there's so many things that you can do in addition to that, whether you choose to do traditional therapy or not, meaning surgery and radiation. This is still an adjunct therapy that can be very profound and is not to be considered as an alternative therapy. It should be a a go-to therapy for people to change their diet, because it's something that you can do at home. Anyone can do this. It doesn't cost you any extra money. If anything, it may even save you some money. But this is something that anyone has access to. And the the scientific data on the outcomes of people who use this type of dietary therapy, in addition to or not the traditional therapies available and treatments in the medical establishment, are profoundly benefited by changing the diet as well. So this is a conjunctive therapy. It's a collaborative therapy. It's not something that should be even seen as alternative. This is well documented in the medical literature, and everybody needs to know about this. I mean, if you look up Dr. Thomas Seyfried, Dr. Otto Warburg, I mean, these are iconic members of the medical community. Thomas Seyfried has published over 120 peer-reviewed papers on the extraordinary results of using a ketogenic diet while also doing other things, such as, maybe low-dose chemo or oxygen therapy, ozone therapy, and also anti-parasitic and antifungal therapies in addition to that, which have been profound. And these are things that may or may not be embraced in the medical community in the US. However, these are things that are out there and they're accessible. And I encourage everybody to look and search and begin your journey by finding trusted leaders and people who have gone down this path and people who know the research and can help guide you, because it is a complex world. But there's people like myself and you that can help guide people. I would just love to have you share a little bit more about how did you discover the ketogenic diet and what are you currently doing in terms of your way of approaching that?
Yeah, well, I think like in nutritional therapy, and I mean, really like how I got into this world of like self healing and the kind of the worldview that the body can heal itself if given the appropriate tools that it needs, and that we're not really born into a culture or a system where this is just a given, right? Pretty much everyone I know, you're born into a situation where the body is not getting what it needs. And you couple that with, you know, emotional trauma, physical trauma, any kind of abuse, and or not, right? And this is a recipe for dysregulation, dysfunction, and ultimately disease. I knew years ago, even, I was like, if I ever got cancer, I would definitely do a ketogenic protocol. And now being on one within a GAPS lens, which is very, very different than, a ketogenic protocol can mean so many different things to so many different people. And I think, long story short, is really, you know, what are what are you eating to stay in ketosis? Um, has it been conventionally raised? So, like, sourcing is really important, but also using tools like meat stock and fermented brines and enemas and just practices to support those detox pathways, because you do go into such a state of detoxification that, luckily I had already been through the worst of this and the bulk of this years before, when I didn't even know that I was healing myself from cancer. But just how important it was to, when you feed the body these really therapeutic healing foods, and you're on a really, like, targeted gut healing protocol, your body's going to start dumping all sorts of toxins. And so I feel like that was something, when I really started, like, voicing my experience, that, and a mistake that I made for years on the GAPS protocol was not really knowing how to support that properly, and thus not really getting the results that I wanted. So I knew that, yeah, the detox pathways have to be open. You can't really detox until you heal your gut, and that you detox in the process of healing your gut. But then that, like, cancer in itself is a very toxic state, and that basically, this protein nest will develop around lymph that isn't moving, to house and a really intense cleanup crew. And so I knew that, um, cancer eats sugar. This is when I kind of started going actually a little bit off script, from GAPS. I'm still like, I agree, like, ketosis is the foundation. Ketosis is the first step. And when you learn that you have a disease that there's a lot of cultural fear around, all I wanted to do was just, like, hide and not do it. I just wanted to, like, go, like, hide under the covers and not do anything. But the first really thing I did with my anxiety was to channel it into a ketogenic protocol. But I wanted to make sure that I was doing literally everything that I could. And so typically, a ketogenic protocol is like between 20 to 30, like, net carbs per day. Well, when I looked into it for cancer, um, I was actually, it would benefit me more to aim between 5 to 10. And and then I kind of went for the protein. So protein in excess amounts can also break down into sugar. And so, my little, like, prescription now, per se, and I say that in air quotes, but, is between 60 to 80 grams of protein a day, as low as 50, depending on where I am in my menstrual cycle. And then I am on a restricted calorie protocol as well. So I'm eating between 1,400 to, like, 1,500 calories a day. And I like to make lots of jokes around how, like, I'm like, oh yeah, you just, like, breathe and you get more than 10 net carbs, but in this state and being in such, like, this will get you into, like, really, like, therapeutic levels of ketosis. And being in the state has made me realize, like, And yeah, Dr. Natasha has been so inspiring to us both, but something that I feel like where I'm starting to like differ from her, and really it's like, okay, I'm developing my own opinions about this, right? And I'm just evolving in my practices. Like, this is so powerful that I know that it can benefit more conditions than just cancer. And that this is such a huge, like, I've never felt better in my entire life. And supposedly I should be doing really bad right now, right? And so, wow.
Quick break from the programming today because nothing lights me up more than empowering people to make informed decisions about their health based on hard scientific facts. The ketogenic diet has stood the test of time, and the scientific literature shows us that this can be a powerful healing strategy. Don't let another day slip by when you could be doing something proactively to change your health. If you're still wondering how to begin your keto diet, it's time to stop thinking and start doing today. Just do it. Go to radicalhealthmakeover.com and download your free copy of my ebook, How to Start a Keto Diet. Now, back to the program.
So that's kind of like the gist of what I'm doing, but I've also incorporated like green tea is not on GAPS, but I'm drinking 3 cups of matcha every morning now because there are so many studies that shows that there is a compound called EGCG, but also like L-theanine. And, when we like break things down into super small parts, I don't really like that very much, but I do like getting specific. And that this is shown to shrink tumors. And so, not really, this was such a gift to really kind of go beyond the dogma and like a certain set of rules and be like, okay, how can I really like customize this information for my situation and not be so just in this gaps this gaps this gaps this. It's like gaps has given me everything that I've needed up until this point. And I actually was blessed with, I had a friend whose mom is an MD. She was trained as an OBGYN and she refused chemotherapy um, 10 years ago and has been disease free ever since through diet and energetic healing. And she did get her lumps surgically removed. She was stage 2, and he was like, I want you to talk to my mom, and so talk about all these like divine things that will support you on your healing journey that I had no idea any of that when I told him. But I was able to run my protocol through her, and she was like, that sounds like it's going to work. And that was a huge deal for me just because you get so much outside information about basically how I was being irresponsible and that I was going to kill myself. And then running it through someone who had already healed herself without chemotherapy. But it is such an intentional process, and I don't know if it's easier going against the grain in certain ways. But I think what I'm really passionate about is just like tapping into that intuitive wisdom of your body and like doing what feels right for you. And then really it was my insecurities and dealing with my family that was like, okay, now I want to find scientific evidence to back this up, that what I'm doing um, is appropriate, and that it is going to work, but also that ultimately I have nothing to prove to anyone. Obviously, I want to live more than anyone else, and this is what feels right for me. And that can look so vastly different to different people. And so, really, just honoring everyone on their journey and not saying this is right and this isn't like across the board, but that it is so custom to the individual, and that how you feel about your own healing practice is just so vastly important, and that you're really on board with it too, right? But yeah, I can feel myself growing and expanding so much, and it's continual. Like I've just started I love that you mentioned plant toxins because that's kind of like the next layer that's unfolding. It's like, oh, well, I like really shouldn't be eating lectins until I'm in remission, and I will probably be on some form of the ketogenic protocol for at least 5 years. But when I'm in remission, instead of 10 net carbs, I can have 20, which feels like so much now. I'm like, oh, that'd be a party like every day. But yeah, just like really honoring the process. I don't know if you know or have heard anything about, just been tipped off to like the connections between oxalates and cancer. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to look into that next. So there's kind of this joke. It's like, first she came from my practice, and I have on a wonderful team. I'm being guided by beautiful, amazing, incredibly intelligent people. So I'm not trying to do this by myself at all. But kind of the joke is like, first she came from my carbs and I didn't say anything. Then she came from my protein and I didn't say anything. But like there is continual information that's being unfolded. That's okay. Oh, okay. Well, shoot. Like now I can't have a cucumber salad because cucumbers have lectins, but like I don't care because I have cancer and I want to address this in every way that I can. So, um, yeah, it's a grieving process for sure when you're like going through this. I'd also be interested in like how you got so into ketosis because another thing, I just love really joking about how like ketogenic protocols are hard. I You feel really great at first. And then what I talk about with other people too who like weren't, I was like, the only reason I would stick with this, like nothing short of cancer would make me like stay so committed. But there's like this 6 week mark that you like hit some kind of wall, and that's when a lot of people give up. And I definitely would have if I didn't have cancer. So I'm actually kind of curious of like what you find, or do you know like why that like kind of like that time period, or like what wall people are really hitting up against, and then kind of like pushing through that, which before I was very like against pushing through something, but I was like, okay, I probably feel awful because my cancer is just like starving and my cancer is a part of me. And so I'm really hungry too. um but then yeah, like the benefits of not being in a feasting state all the time. And before it was a ketogenic protocol, it was hunter gatherer. It was just called your life. And that you don't consciously choose, right? That you don't have access to a certain amount of food at a certain time or whatever. But I realize how incredibly beneficial that actually is. And it's not through adding more things and like being satiated all the time. It's through actually like replicating these mechanisms that, in general and culturally, we're like, oh, we're like away from that now. Oh, we're past that now. It's like actually some of the like the fasting state and different like that's incredibly beneficial, and that like the toughest times make us the strongest, and really just seeing that through like a food lens as well. So I'd be curious like what you think about that, because I'm sure that you've witnessed people hitting their walls and being like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
um but
Yeah.
yeah, it's all been worth it.
Yeah. Well, there comes a point in time when, for some people, it may be at the very beginning that's the hardest, but we
Mhm.
come up against our ego and our automated system that tells us what to do when we're not really paying attention, our unconscious, if you will. I talk a lot about this in my book, Radical Health Makeover: The Science and Spirituality of Self-Healing. And it's so important to feel that you're being guided by your higher power, or whatever it is that you have your faith in. That's such a huge piece of it. And then things just start to unfold effortlessly. Like you said, you met this person and they told you about this, and then you met that person and oh, they told you about that. And you just keep going through the open doorways instead of sitting there beating your head up against the wall, having so much anxiety that you can't get out of bed, which is the other option. And that's the sort of position that the medical establishment puts people in, because you can't get that diagnosis and not go into a fear state. And then the question is, how do you get out of that? How do you actually begin to be productive and be able to make conscious, aware, informed, truly informed decisions, which aren't offered in the current medical paradigm? They don't tell you all of the things that are available. They're only telling you the very few, very narrow window that they can offer you, which is pills and surgery and radiation and, chemo, right? So that's it. And beyond that, you're not going to get any information. So you have to be empowered somewhere to be able to find your way and really walk your own path that's going to be unique to you. And you've done that in such a beautiful way. So great job. As far as keto, in terms of how I got into this, I came about it about 25 years ago. I started working with Dr. Stephen Finney in his clinic in Sacramento. That was my first job right out of nursing school. And I always knew that I would not, would not ever work in a hospital. After finishing nursing school, I realized that doctors did not know anything about nutrition, because if they did, they certainly wouldn't be feeding people in hospitals the things that they're eating. So I was so completely torn after seeing what I saw in the hospitals. I was shocked. And then I thought, wow, I think I might know more than other doctors about nutrition. And so from there, I luckily found this sort of anomaly going on in my own hometown of Sacramento, which was Stephen Finney's clinic. And if you don't know him, he's one of the, I would say, the godfather of the ketogenic diet in my world. He's been instrumental. And so I'm very grateful for his work. He did a lot of research, and he's just a wealth of information. He runs the Virta Health organization. If you're not familiar, you want to check that out. Mainly dealing with diabetes and obesity. So reversing those things with a ketogenic diet. So it's well documented in the medical science, the literature, the studies have all shown that this can be done. And one of the things that Dr. Stephen Finney says is that you're not actually fully keto adapted for at least 6 weeks. So it takes at least 6 weeks of being in ketosis to actually become fully keto adapted. So what you're experiencing is really a deep metabolic shift within your matrix of your mitochondria, within your energy production systems in your body. And we encounter this at the beginning because our brain chemistry is programmed and really looking for the hit of the dopamine and the glucose all the time, because most people are running always on glucose. And when we switch over to a fat-based diet or running on fat for fuel and producing ketones as the result of that fat metabolism, our brain chemistry starts to really long for those other triggers that, it's just like I mentioned in my book, like Pavlov's dogs, right? So the dogs, they hear the bell. They don't even smell the food. They just hear the bell, and then they start to salivate. So our brain is wired. It's programmed to do what it knows how to do. That's been conditioned, right? So when we take away the conditioning formula, our brain chemistry starts to really kind of do some backflips. And that's when we start to feel very fatigued, very out of sorts, low energy, really having lots of cravings. The other thing that happens is the bacteria in our gut really start to shift. And those are the little beings that live inside of us that are really also telling us, eat the sugar, you want the carbs. So if you can make it through that first couple weeks, and 3 weeks, I would say is minimum. And that's usually when people say they have, the toughest time, because they're dealing with their gut microbiome is shifting, and really the cravings for carbs are intense. So it's not only your cells, your cellular machinery that's trying to switch over into fat burning mode, but your brain chemistry, your gut microbiome, and your mitochondria are sort of rusty, and they're working, and they're completely changing. Everything's changing. Your gut microbiome, the lining of your gut is sloughing off and healing and repairing. So there's a lot going on in that first 6 weeks. So if you can make it to the 6-week mark and beyond, you're off to a great start. And it does take such a commitment. So I honor you for your courage to just stay committed to this, because it's not for everyone. And like you said, if you didn't have cancer, you probably would have said, forget it. And that's sometimes what it takes, is just a tremendous outside influence to motivate us to say, okay, this is a lifestyle. This is not a quick fix. This is not something I'm going to try for a little while and see how I feel. This is a commitment, and you're on that path. And so that's a beautiful thing.
That is so validating to hear about the 6-week thing. What a metaphor, right? Of just like the uncomfortability, uncomfortable. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now, of transition. And just like how, you know, even if you're not on like a really strict ketogenic protocol per se, like what if you're just like going on GAPS intro or something, you're going to be so uncomfortable. And just kind of like being okay with that, and letting it be okay that you're uncomfortable, and like realizing like, yeah, I'm uncomfortable because like I'm shifting out of a state that supports disease. What is familiar is calming to us, even if it's
Absolutely.
really unhealthy. And
Right.
so, like, transitioning out of that, like, I had been like on a really intense protocol before this. And so I was just like, a lot of my a lot of my microbiome had already shifted. I mean, I my whole entire body used to be covered in rashes. I used to not even be able to get out of bed or wear clothes. And that was years ago at this point. And so I was like, this is so hard for me. What is this going to feel like for everyone else? And who maybe hasn't been through as much or hasn't done as much work or whatever. And yeah, I think that's also kind of what I needed, or even just being exposed to other people who have transformed their health in such a way that's like, okay, if I just stick with this is really hard right now, but if I just stick with this, like I know it'll be worth it, because it's really hard to hold space for yourself when I'm laying in bed just like fantasizing about lettuce, which I did give myself. I'm like, okay, like there are certain things I'm like, okay, there's, according to my carb manager app, I think there's like 2 net carbs and 2 cups of lettuce, or one or something like that. And it's like, okay, I can eat lettuce. That's what we're gonna do to emotionally support yourself right now. Is you're just going to have a really like creamy, cheesy, like salad. And it was like the best thing ever. And so it's like, okay, where can I give myself maybe when I'm depriving myself that I don't need to, but like, how can I work with this? Because I hadn't felt that sense of white knuckling in such a long time. And so it really gave me so much compassion for the people I work with, just because that feeling I had left behind so long ago had come back. And it's like, oh, okay, something's really shifting and changing here. And so knowing exactly, like hearing you say exactly what was going on, I was like, okay, because I'm not the only person that's like the 6 weeks, like that's when I gave up. And it's like, oh, that's because you're going through such a profound transition. So that's when you're going to be the most uncomfortable.
Yeah. Good. That's great. And you did mention something about the oxalates, and we have, most people are aware of lectins. Gluten's sort of the most famous lectin of all, but there's oxalates, there's phytates, there's tannins, there's all these other compounds in plants, right? So the GAPS intro diet, if you're not familiar, the listeners, is no plants, right? And typically people don't stay on that for forever. But if you're doing a keto GAPS, it's essentially you're staying in, stage 1 GAPS for as long as you choose. But most people don't do it for that long. And there's always sort of, in my experience, there's always sort of this rush to push through the next stage, right? So it's not something that people hang out in that space for an extended period of time. And so with the keto GAPS approach, that's kind of where you are, and that's where I kind of live as well. And So yeah, all these plants have toxins, and I do talk a lot about this in my book as well. So you can check that out. I don't know if you have a copy of my book, but it's called Radical Health Makeover: The Science and Spirituality of Self-Healing. And I talk a lot about these plant toxins and also really getting the mindset in place, because that's what you're going to need. That's your scaffolding. That's your foundation to build from. If you don't have a very solid structure in place as daily practices, self-care, spiritual practices, meditations, all of these things, your egoic mind is just going to run you over the coals. And so I feel that this is the missing link for so many people, that they just can't skip that part. And once you've made it through that, and you know that you're divinely guided, the rest of it is a lot easier. Maybe not easy, but easier. And certainly, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing and evolving and changing and transforming. So know that this is not a comfortable journey to go down. Not to mention the stress of disappointing family and friends because you're not doing the quote unquote the right thing. But yet, if you look at the science, it's not backed by science. This medical modality, the protocols that are in place are not actually backed by science. They do not improve outcomes. But if you can couple the nutrition with other traditional protocols or not, you're going to have much better outcomes. And the ketogenic diet is something to definitely consider for cancer remission and reversal, and just keeping it in check. So it may not be the end all be all, but like I said, it's something to consider for certain. Because like you said, cancer loves glucose. That's its primary fuel source. And a cancer cell requires 10 times the amount of glucose as a normal healthy cell. And so when we eat glucose, our cancer cells are having a party in there, and we want to shut the party down, right? We're going to put an end to that party and starve the cancer and get rid of it. So fasting is a great way to do this. Obviously, eating no carbohydrates is a great way to do this, and other things that we can be doing as well to support the gut healing. And so I just wanted to say really quick that for people that don't understand this, if you have a leaky gut, every time you eat anything, no matter how healthy it is, you have a river of toxins going into your bloodstream. And those toxins have to go someplace. And they accumulate in the fatty organs and the tissues in the lymph system. This is why women get, lumps in their breasts, for example. This is the lymphatic system that is there to filter out toxins. So of course they would accumulate there. That's what the lymph nodes are for, right? So when the very first place to look if you have cancer is to heal your gut, period. And we can do this with by stopping putting in the toxins, obviously, which come from a lot of the plant materials that we're putting in. And also, once that heals and you can seal and heal your gut, down the road, you might be able to eat some plants, but it would be in moderation. It would be once in a while where you could still have time to detox from the plants that you ate. And we used to do this as, evolving humans. We used to eat seasonally, but we don't do that anymore. And so these toxins just build up. Even if you're eating the healthiest, organic, all the green smoothies and salads and, dark 100% cacao and all the, quote unquote health foods, these are extremely high in oxalates and I call them anti-nutrients. They're just anti-nutrients. So they pull nutrients, minerals from your body. They bind to them so you cannot use them, and then they accumulate and they look kind of like shards of glass under a microscope. So they get in your joints, in your lymph, in your kidneys, in your bones. They go in places that you do not want them to go, in your organs essentially. And they hide out there and they cause all kinds of problems. So in order to detox them, I'm in my own detox process from anti-nutrients over the last 3 years since I completely cut out plants from my diet. And I've just noticed extraordinary benefits in the last 3 years. And this is after doing keto for 20 years and, very, very low carb diet, but with lots of plants up until, I would say 3 years ago, I made a pretty major shift. So I have a question for you, and I'm open to you asking me anything that if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. But I'm curious, why are you doing low calorie?
The more that we eat, the more we have to process. And that takes energy, that takes resources. And so really my body's getting like the bare minimum and I feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Um
What do you feel?
and yeah, there's like, and this is kind of something where it's like, okay, this practitioner has really been helping me. This is what she said to do. I'll look into this later kind of thing. And it just like feels right for whatever reason. But I do feel like just not being able to gorge myself, there's something to that. And it's not like what I plan on being on forever. Um, but I really have like, I've noticed quite a difference in, not just being, I mean, really like, okay, if I'm on a limited amount of carbs and I'm on a limited amount of protein, what's left? Fat. Well, I don't want to just eat like 1,000 more calories of fat, like I just want to stop. And so on some level it feels natural. Um,
Is
just
that
from
because
like,
you're not hungry?
definitely sometimes I do still, I realize I'm on like month 3
Okay.
of ketogenic.
Okay.
And sometimes I will just kind of like lay in bed being like, oh, my 6-hour eating window is over and I want to eat and I'm not going to. Before cancer, I would have never really let myself do that. I would have like gotten up and like just like drank some kefir or something. But just kind of knowing that, yeah, this is going to be uncomfortable sometimes. That's probably the cancer being like, I'm hungry, feed me. Um, but I really like how I feel right now.
Mm.
Like I feel so good. And it is kind of like this superhuman thing. I'm young. Like I'm back in the dating pool. And so like these guys will be like, oh, are you like hungry? Do you want to get something to eat? I was like, oh, I don't eat. It's just like, oh yeah, like I had a 6-hour eating window and that was over like hours ago. So, and I'm at this point in my life and like already had been, because I was also eating a lot of plants and healing, right? I hung out on intro stage 2 for like a year. You said like most people don't hang out there. I was so sick, right? But intro stage 2, there are like not every single vegetable is allowed, but and then it's within like it's all customized to like what you can tolerate. And I was quote unquote tolerating these vegetables. And whenever anyone says that GAPS is low carb, now I'm like, it is not low carb at all. There's nothing low carb about GAPS. Though it may seem like that to someone who's like, oh, I have to cut out grains, I have to like cut out potatoes. And like that had already been like, I had already been on that journey. I was like on that bus and I had been on it for a while. And so taking things a step further. And yeah, I still eat some plants. And so, like, hearing your kind of perspective, I'm like, wow. And not having that exact situation, but being like, yeah, like I was on GAPS intro for a year up until like graduated kind of to a more full GAPS kind of like diet and lifestyle, and experienced so much healing from so many of my symptoms just with that. And then realizing it, you can always take it a step further and you're like, oh, I'm done, I like reached it. And it's like, no, you didn't. Like there's just like you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and the things are never hopeless. If you have some kind of like issue that's not resolving, it's actually a gift showing you where you need to go next. And so yeah, I want to honor that as well of like, wow. Just like, so I don't know if you've heard about Dwayne Lee Johnson. He's the man who won the lawsuit against Monsanto basically he had an accident with Roundup as a school groundskeeper, and he spilled Roundup like all over his body. And he tried contacting Monsanto and was like, hey, like I showered. Is there anything else I should do? And no one responded to him. And that's actually when he decided to press charges. It's like, no one even called me back. And they were able to find that there's evidence that Monsanto has known that its chemicals have caused cancer for the last 2 decades. So the last 20 years that we have been spraying nonstop. People at the top know exactly what this is doing, and it's the populace who's left with, it's safe. Why are you so concerned? Like, kind of people who are really in tune with their bodies are. So Dwayne Lee Johnson got a terminal diagnosis of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And another like really cool divinely synchronicity thing that happened was I realized I know someone who grew up with this guy, and I had no idea before. And I was like, but when I learned that I had cancer and I told this friend, he was like, oh my gosh. It was actually because there's like a documentary coming out called Into the Weeds that's like all about this. But originally, and this is our justice system that is so geared towards protecting corporations and big money interests. And, Monsanto is embedded into the government of US society. And then this kind of culture has spread throughout the world. But I asked him, I was like, oh my gosh, how's that guy doing? Originally, they awarded Lee Johnson $289 million. He ended up settling at 25, and he has gotten paid since then. It's been years, but at one point, this guy was on the cover of Time magazine. It was a big story, and I was shocked because who can ever beat Monsanto, right? And then it provided this foundation for, okay, now that we've established that these pesticides that we're spraying all over our food, and he was a groundskeeper at a school where young children are playing, that this causes cancer. That means that this door is open for anyone who can. I mean, I'm not going that route, even though I probably could. There's so many hoops to jump through, so many like official things that I'm not going to do that I would need to. But I got to ask my friend, I was like, how is he doing? Is he still alive? Like, he's been pretty quiet, this kind of thing. And he said, so I mentioned that I had just like horrendous issues with my skin, and it would be like weeping and swelling, and I'd be so swollen that I like couldn't sit on the toilet, but it would be like a rat, like, but there's no word for like just how like it encompassed like my entire being. And I was just like, how's he doing? And he's like, yeah, he's still alive, and he got the money, so he's able to do things that aren't covered by insurance, and he has kids, he's like doing well enough. But every night when he goes to bed, he has to change his sheets in the morning because his skin just like falls off, and the sheets are just like covered with blood every single morning. And I was just like thinking to myself, wow, I healed all my skin issues without even knowing that I had cancer. But then when you have more information, right, you go ketogenic, you eliminate these toxins that have been irritating you, even though you've also been healing the whole time. You can just take it to that next level to get you where you really need to go. So I thought that was really powerful. It's like, okay, you don't need to know everything, but you need to honor when the information does come through, and that there is so much healing that can happen despite not really addressing part of your situation that you don't even know exists yet, right? And then it's doubly empowering to like implement new strategies that are specific to your situation and seeing them work and just being like, wow, okay, this is the part I was missing, but I don't even think I would have been ready for this 2 years ago. Right. And so just like really trusting in that divine timing of things is also really important, and honoring that when the information does go through, that you take action and, incorporate and implement these things into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had a debilitating skin issue, and that's how you found gaps in the first place, and that's how you healed your skin issues was with GAPS diet?
So I actually found gaps um 4 years before. Well, I'd heard about gaps actually in herb school. We had like a nutrition component, and I don't know if you've heard of Herb Farm. They're like the leading tincture company in the US, but I had my environmental science, like my honors project for my degree was to ironically study the anti-cancer compounds in the common ground cherry, which is just a weed in Kansas, is originally where I'm from, which is also where a lot of pesticides are in the water table and the environment because of these um, Monsanto and giant agricultural companies that, yeah, won't go into that, but I was exposed a lot, and I don't think I had the microbiome to. Your microbiome basically detoxes for you. It produces ALA, for example, which is a chelator, which removes heavy metals from the body without you having to think about or do anything. But microbiome with the modern lifestyle degrades actually over generations. So I think part of me was just constitutionally vulnerable to toxins in my environment because I just kept them in my body. They didn't go anywhere, right? Whereas if you're a healthy, robust person that's never been exposed to anything like this in your life, your body will be strong enough to to relay or to detox if it's just like an acute one-time situation. Like our bodies are incredible. It's just like constant onslaught and like never getting a break and not even having like the microbiome or the health to begin with, right? So I identified that a lot with my situation, but warning signs for that something's off can really look like anything. For me, my mental health was the first thing to really start presenting itself. And I didn't know anything about any of this stuff when I was 15, but I started getting like really severely depressed. By the time I was 17, I was diagnosed with bipolar, ADD, PTSD, and actually found a lot of healing through diet and lifestyle when I was in college, and was able to get off the meds just by, I was a vegetarian too at the time. I'm talking not needing to know everything, right? But I started cooking a lot more for myself. I didn't go to McDonald's anymore, like just things that you're removing a lot of processed food from my diet. And ultimately, that wasn't the end all be or the final answer, but it did raise my awareness into like, okay, like what growing my own food, right? That does really make a difference. But when I moved to Alaska, when I was 26, I had previously spent my adult life in the Pacific Northwest, where there was a lot of access to organic food, and um, there really wasn't that in Alaska. People culturally, it was just bread and beer, and I was like, I think I can do that again, even though I'd been doing really well without it. And I ended up, Mary, I think at my lowest point, I had kind of like I was like so mad, and I don't even remember why, but I ended up punching like three holes in our wall and like demanding for my partner to come home from his job, even though he worked like an hourly, like you can't just leave a job like that. There's no flexibility whatsoever. He had a shift and he was supposed to be here. And I was like, well, I just like punched 3 holes in the wall and all this stuff. And then kind of like, I don't remember what I was mad about at all. I was throwing an adult tantrum and I had no control over my emotional state, over my body, over the way I was reacting to things. And I had this like kind of come to Jesus moment where I was like, I'm going to lose everyone I love if I don't either A, get back on medication or try this gut and psychology syndrome thing that I learned about in my like prestigious little herb school that I thought had no relevance to my life whatsoever. So I think being exposed to even these general concepts was such a huge privilege. And then being able to kind of hit like one of those rock bottom moments where it's like, okay, it's kind of like do or die right now. It's like, okay, Lauren, you can either go back on medication or you can try this diet. And I developed so much, like, I experienced so much success from that. But you're just continually, I feel like, peeling a layer of the onion to like just how powerful implementing these concepts and really embodying these concepts in your life, like really where it is. But I think that's something kind of like noteworthy or kind of actually kind of odd about my story is that I was on GAPS for years before I actually hit my rock bottom. And I think something about that was a lot of the information that I was missing, but also I did take a job spraying pesticides. Yeah. When I was on GAPS, knowing that that wasn't ideal, but I didn't realize how dangerous it was and was even kind of misconceived by the people who employed me. They're like, you're only going to have to do it a little bit, and I was in the environmental conservation field at the time, and it was like it's called a vegetation management. Okay. Vegetation management. I was in a really like hippie town in Colorado, and they were like, yeah, we don't do it very much. We just do it when it's absolutely necessary because when these evil invasive plants come in, there's no other choice, which there totally is. And it's all about the health of the soil, which you turn that inside. And it's like, it's all about the health of the gut, right? It's like, it's the foundation and everything builds from there. But I ended up spraying like almost every day, and I got so sick that I had to quit the job like within 2 months. After being pretty much fully, in my mind, pretty much fully healed by that point, and a lot of my food sensitivities came back. That's when my rashes started really getting out of control. So like I had a case of poison ivy that wouldn't go away for 3 months. It just like kept spreading. And I remember that was like the first like red flag. It's just like something is seriously wrong with your immune system versus like right now, technically I have stage 3 cancer. I just got poison oak and it was not that bad at all. And it went away in 2 weeks. And it was not a thing at all. But technically, I'm supposed to be like so much worse because I have cancer now. Well, no, I'm that much further in my healing journey where I'm like, wow, like 2017, I couldn't even recover from poison ivy.
Wow.
And now
Well,
it's like,
it's interesting because the skin is a mirror of what's going on inside the gut. So if your skin is inflamed, if you have rashes, if you have itching, if you have eczema, psoriasis, any of these things are a direct lens into how your gut lining is doing and even your hair. So I work with a lot of women that have alopecia or they've lost their hair. And it's like those little hairs in your gut are mirroring what's going on in your head. So to heal your outside of your body, your skin, your hair, your everything, that barrier is a mirror image of the barrier inside of our gut. So that's really important that you bring that up. This is a very sort of pivotal conversation because there's people that go onto a keto diet and they have body fat to burn. In other words, they have extra weight they're carrying around.
mm-hmm.
And they would approach a keto diet incredibly different than somebody who has no body fat to burn, somebody who is cachexic, somebody who has been through chemo, somebody who's very frail and underweight. If you know, that happens a lot with traditional chemotherapy protocols, is
Mhm.
people can't eat, so they lose way too much weight. They're underweight, they need to gain weight, or if somebody really needs to maintain their body weight, and or if they're trying to build muscle, right? So you everybody's different. This is not a one size fits all. And so yeah, I just wanted to clarify that if you are trying to lose weight, you're on a totally different ketogenic diet path than somebody who's trying to maintain their ideal body weight. And if you're in ketosis, it's you're not necessarily on a restricted calorie diet, even though it may seem that way. If you looked at your macros, if you're tracking them, it may say you need 2000 and you're only eating 1500, but you're really getting those other 500, let's say, from your own body fat, right? If you're not in ketosis and you need 2000 calories and you're only eating 1500, you are running on a deficit, and that will ultimately cause your hormones to become imbalanced over time. That is not a sustainable approach to weight loss. So I just want to say that it will slow your metabolism down if you are reducing your calories and you're not on a ketogenic diet, because your body doesn't have any access to those calories. And the way that it compensates is it reduces your amount of energy that you expend. So you become very tired, lethargic, your hormones come out of balance, and you also are working at a deficit. So you can become very malnourished. I just wanted to put that out there just to clarify that, because it's really an important point. If you have reached your ideal body weight and you're on a ketogenic diet, you need to eat more fat. Okay. And you can gain weight or maintain your body weight based on how much fat you add back into your diet once you've reached that point where you don't want to lose any more body fat. So, yes. And toxins are stored in your fat cells. So, if you are carrying around extra body fat, they're holding onto those toxins for you, like you said, to protect. And when you start to metabolize that fat for energy, those toxins, they have to get out of your body. So again, you want to make sure your gut is healed and sealed so they don't just get reabsorbed and reabsorbed and reabsorbed, right? They need to flush through and they need to flush out, which is brings me to a point you mentioned earlier that you were doing coffee enemas. Is that what you said?
Actually, coffee enemas were too detoxing for me at the time, so I would
Uh-huh.
do cleansing enemas, but I did cleansing enemas every day for, like, over 2 years straight, and I don't know what I would have done without them, and it's kind of, like, funny and ironic now because I don't necessarily need to do them anymore in the same way versus, if I would skip a day a couple years ago, my rashes would get way worse. Like I would notice
Mm-hmm.
versus now it's like it's definitely helpful and beneficial. I'm also traveling full time now. And I love what you were saying about thank you for clarifying all that and I was like, "Oh, okay. So once I get to my ideal body weight, I want to eat more fat or whatever." But um I went from this housebound, bedridden state to actually when I went into ketosis, I just had this drive. I was like, I want to go on a hike like every morning. And it was actually part of my process in processing the fact that I had cancer and making all these really incredibly difficult decisions. That's how I coped, or one of the ways that I coped. And I felt like I had so much energy
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that it was like all coming from my body, that it was like being released in a way that it couldn't before. So that's really interesting. But yeah, the coffee enemas when I was really ill, because they were recommended to me. And then and they actually made me super nauseous and just I felt awful afterwards. And one of my practitioners, Becky Plotner, she was like, that means that you're trying to like remove something that's not ready to come out yet.
Mm.
And that just stick with cleansing ones. And so I stuck with cleansing ones for years, and so many parasites came out of me, so many gallstones came out of me. Like, I would say probably like hundreds of thousands of parasites. I've passed probably like at least like 1,000 gallstones, and have not done a single coffee enema since. And this is where
Wow.
I will totally own that. Um, I've been recommended to get back on that train and I just haven't. And
Uh-huh.
so I'm not perfect. There are recommendations that have been given to me that I have not taken action on. And it's not that I never will, but yeah, I'm not there right now. I think the most important thing for me on this journey is being really honest about where I am
Mhm.
and really honest with myself about what I can do, because there have definitely been situations where I'm like, I'm traveling, like I can't have a routine. And then my practitioner will be like, "So you can't do X, Y, and Z every morning. Why?" And my jaw just kind of like hangs open, like my mouth, and I'm just like, I don't know, because I want to make excuses. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's like that mental capacity too, but then also being really careful that I think with cancer or any really like intense chronic illness, it's like you never feel like you're doing enough, and there's always something more you can do,
Mhm.
but beating yourself up about it or really forcing the issue in some ways, like, well, is that really serving you, or is that just perpetuating a pattern of disease even further by telling yourself that you're not enough and getting yourself into a really high cortisol state or whatever it is. So yeah, I don't want to act like, oh, I'm just like perfect and I do everything right and there's nothing that I could do more of or anything. And so, but I think part of the healing or part of the balance is like also holding space for that part of yourself. It's just like, I'm
Yeah.
staying at a friend's house and coffee enemas take a long time to prepare and
Mm.
you need the right temperature and like, I'm
All
just
that stuff.
do
Yeah.
that today. Yeah,
I
and
know about
yeah,
coffee enemas.
but definitely a balance for
It's
sure.
yeah, but it's a really powerful practice too to flush your liver and gallbladder, especially if you have jammed up, you know, clusters of toxins resting around in your organs. That's it's a really great practice. I mean, I commend you for making the commitment to do that because it isn't easy and it's a huge commitment. So
And it has
kudos.
changed my life. There's
Yeah.
nothing more like, it's just it's incredible. Yeah, and I have gotten to the point that I'm traveling and I still do a cleansing enema. For those of you who don't know, it's salt and baking soda inside filtered water that's been, you know, well, it's there's a process to it for
Yeah.
sure, but that became so normal to me that I can just kind of go in and out really quick.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like they're like gorilla enemas in a way, like the GUE, like just because I do them so fast and I can like mainline all that water into my system so much, like so quickly, and then just to walk around it with it for 15 minutes before I release it versus, you know, when you first start, you kind of like baby yourself and you're like laying in the tub or the floor like on a towel the whole time and it's like really hard to like hold it. And so I am really grateful that it's like, yeah, that part's not a big deal. Coffee enemas are more involved, but yeah, I mean, there's a protocol specifically designed for cancer that you're doing 4 coffee enemas a day, and being like, "Oh, yeah, that would probably help," you know, and I'm not doing that right now, but I'm
Right.
doing everything I can in all these other ways, and I'm gonna hold that space for myself.
That's great. So are you doing anything like ozone or IV, vitamin infusions or anti-parasitics or antifungals or anything in addition to your dietary protocols?
Definitely. And yeah, there's not time to go into all of that, but like this actually seeing this happen in my own body was like mind blowing for me and just kind of like understanding how the body works. And so maybe this will help someone else. When I did the black salve, basically what it does is if it comes into contact with cancer, the area around the black salve will turn white. And then after day 8, the tumor literally was like pulled out and then like separated from my body. And then you have this hole that needs to fill in, and it's equivalent of recovering from a major surgery. And so it takes so many nutritional resources. And I experience like any like connective tissue, like my teeth, my gums, my hair, my nails got really thin. I got a lot of cavities. Becky with the black salve has also, she like showed me pictures of inside her mouth after doing the black salve, and it completely like it just takes like everything your body has. Like my eyebrows started falling out, and like it grew back, but I was like, there's like a patch of my eyebrow missing. Like I'm freaking out, you know. But all is to say that when I did my second thermography scan, a lot of the tumors in the hot spots has shrank, but Becky's the person who interprets them for me, and she was like, "There's something very concerning about this scan," and that's literally the first thing she said to me. So I'm just like, "I'm dying, aren't I?" Like, well, you know, all of this stuff. She was like, "No, what's happening is that it looks like there is an infection in your mouth, and or there's something wrong with your teeth, and then it's going down your neck and into your chest, but it's not draining." And so ozone, for those of you who don't know, ozone like has been shown to just like kills cancer. So I'm oil pulling with ozonated oil every single morning and every single night. And I think like if you look at like the textbook definition, it's like you swish it, or you like put a tablespoon of ozonated oil in your mouth for like 15 minutes. Well, me being who I am and just being overly cautious, I'm like, well, what about 40 minutes? What about an hour? How about as long as I can keep this stuff in my mouth? Also, it's expensive, so let's make the most of this. And so that's like addressing like the root cause. No pun intended, because I was like, it feels like I mean, not everyone's watching the video, but it feels like it's going like up into my cheek. Like when she was like, it sounds like you have an infection in your mouth or something wrong. I was like, I think I know what you're talking about. And then there are a few things that really help your lymph drain. And Becky assured me, because I was like, you know, my parents, because I refused chemotherapy, like they think I'm going to die. And so that's kind of the story that I was telling myself. I was like, well, I guess I'm just bad because I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to pay the price for it with my life or whatever. And like consciously being like, no, that's not true. But then like subconsciously just being like, oh gosh, like, and yeah, just having that like energetic tie to your parents and what they think of you and how you develop your own self-worth around that. But Becky was like, people who have cancer, you feel like if you have bad cancer, you feel like you have concrete flowing through your veins. You know, I'm going to put like my big girl panties on and I'm going to go rake leaves. Like you start dry heaving just from raking leaves. She was like, that is not your situation. Last time I checked, you did not have an expiration date on the bottom of your foot. Like, stop saying that you're dying. You're not dying. You're doing really well. But what we want to do is we want to keep this cancer under control, and we want to keep it from becoming bad. And so what she's having me do, the ozonated oil is like killing and balancing whatever needs to in my mouth, but then also like all this lymph that's not draining. And anyone who's like watched my YouTube channel, you know, it's like I turn aside and there's like, you know, I'm not overweight, but I totally have a double chin. Like that is stagnant lymph. And so I have this lymphatic massage oil that I actually made myself out of yarrow and plantain. And I dry skin brush. I jump on a trampoline every morning, which is great fun, along with getting really high on matcha and caffeine. I'm like, cancer's not so bad. But yeah, and then just she's like, what what you do with lymph that's the most powerful is like physically like moving it through your body. Um, and like never skipping a day, never skipping a beat. Like this is what keeps lymph draining. And then realizing I'm like, oh my gosh, because when stuff gets stuck there, that's when you need the yeast. That's when you need the parasites as this cleanup crew. And if it's too much for these freelance kind of floating like parasites that your body totally gives permission to, it's like body's like, I don't know what to do with this, but there's a bunch of stuff in your lymph, which is like the physical location of your immune system in your body. So it's like, okay, the immune system can't deal with this. We need to bring some outside contractors in, right? Which are parasites, which is candida, any kind of like pathogenic fungus, pathogenic organisms, etc. But when the job's too great for them, body's like, okay, we're going to section all this off. We're going to create a nest of protein from our own cells, and we're going to wrap this around this really problematic area, and we're going to create a concentrated environment where these really specific parasites and yeast and cleanup crew can thrive and survive and really take care of this. And that's what a tumor is. But your body doesn't, it's literally half cancer, half you when it first develops. And then every generation of cells, it becomes more cancer, less you. And that's how it overtakes your body. And so when you're going after these tumors, you're also going after yourself. Like, I am cancer, and cancer is me. And so, like, how would I want to treat myself? Or how do I let this cancer know that, like, hey, I got this. You're not needed anymore. Like, I'm going to be part of this cleanup crew, and we don't need to create any more tumors. But that's how your body doesn't notice the tumors, right? And your immune system doesn't go after these tumors because they're literally made up of your own cells. And I'm like, okay, so that's the connection. That's the connection between the microbiome and toxicity and cancer, and how it's the spectrum, and that they're not isolated incidences. They're not isolated things. Cancer is, like, I think, the utmost progression of, like, okay, there's a lot of toxicity here. Let's shut this thing down. Like, let's create this protein nest where, like, nothing can bother us and nothing can interfere with, the role that parasites and candida play in your body, which is like, we're here to protect you from something, and we cause really gnarly symptoms. And so what I've found is, yeah, like, eliminating that need from, like, restoring your internal ecosystem, like, that's really where it's at. Whether you have cancer or whether you're struggling with something else, like, that is where you start.
Right.
Um, and yeah, and then, yeah, you can bring in, I love how I did not realize how connected you were with kind of like, yeah, the godfather of the ketogenic protocol, and then anything that you learn over time that, like, really evolves and, like, elevates your journey and your journey of self-healing.
Yeah, I came from a place of working in the clinic with obese diabetic people with, heart disease and all sorts of things, like grossly obese people, 300, 400 pounds overweight. And we would be able to reverse that and get them back to normal weight, and their blood pressure would regulate, and they get off their diabetes medications. I mean, it was like a miracle. But I didn't really see the ketogenic diet as a piece of the puzzle for other people. And even myself, I knew that, excess glucose was not ideal in huge excess, because this is the outcome of that. But as it didn't really pertain to me at that time in my life until my 4 children were a little bit older, and I started seeing the connection between them eating sugar and getting sick. So my passion for the ketogenic diet really stemmed from the effects that it has on the immune system. And that's really where my background came in. And so I started doing lots of my own research and really looking into the connection between glucose and immune dysfunction. And then it all is history from there. But so I come at it personally from a little bit different angle. I never did it to lose weight. I just did it because I wanted to be the most healthy I could be and to have the strongest immune system. And we've learned so much, in the last 40 years or, 25 years since I learned about the ketogenic diet and all of the far reaching benefits into so many different disease processes. In virtually every chronic disease is rooted in metabolic dysfunction. And so when we talk about this process, we're really changing the terrain of our body. We're changing the interior physiology in such a profound way that the cancer just doesn't have the opportunity to thrive anymore. It's lost its fuel source, and the tumor is actually a protective mechanism, right? So that's to protect the rest of the body. Our body is doing us a favor by encapsulating the problem into a very clever wrapping so that it doesn't spread until it does, right? And this is a whole nother issue of biopsies and breaking that exterior wrapping, if you will, and the dangers associated with that. But we won't get into that this time. Maybe we'll do another podcast and I'll bring you back in a couple of months and we'll check in and see how you're doing. But we have so much in common. It was just such a lovely time to share with you. And I so appreciate your story and you being so vibrant and beautiful and sharing yourself with everybody, because your story is really going to impact other people. And everybody needs to know this, that cancer, everybody has cancer. So I have it, you have it, everybody has cancer cells in their body. And it's really just comes down to how is our immune system coping with that? And how can we support our immune systems if we do have a diagnosis, quote unquote, to do what it needs to do to get rid of it. And sometimes we do need to go to extraordinary measures, and sometimes we choose that, and that's fine. And other times, people want to know what their alternatives are. Maybe they've run into the dead end. Maybe they've already done all those things and they want something else, or they want something more, or something in addition to those, typical traditional protocols. So offered by the medical establishment, I mean. So there are other things you can do in conjunction. I encourage all of the listeners to explore these things. There are practitioners like yourself that know and have been down that path and can really guide people. And I also work with cancer patients as well. And, there's just a lot to know. And there's some tips and tricks. If you know somebody who can help you and hold your hand and guide you, it's going to make all the difference in the world. Sometimes we don't have time to waste. And there's no reason that you as the listener needs to figure all that out by yourself, because it's a little bit tricky. And I'm here to say that it's not always an easy path, and you can do it. So I empower you to check in with your body and just listen and tune in to what is resonating with you right now and what you are feeling about this conversation, because if you feel inspired, then you know that you're open to receiving this information and your body knows the truth. So trust your body and know that it can heal itself if it's given the right tools. And is there anything that you might want to leave with the world as they listen to this? Is there one thing you might want to say to people before we end this interview today?
Oh, wow. Oh, what a question. I'm sure there is, and I'll just let it come through. I think it's really hard. I feel like our whole lives we've been kind of programmed to look for outside validation. We'll feel something, and then we'll make sure that it's okay to feel that way by running that idea past other people. And then we decide whether it's a valid feeling or a valid thought or not based on the reaction that we get from our immediate family, our immediate friend group, the people who are around us. I think really the root of the healing journey, whether it starts with physically supporting yourself so that you're clear enough that you can do this, or maybe it is spiritual first and you kind of get brave enough to take that leap regardless of how other people feel. Maybe you're in an incredibly supportive environment and that's really awesome, but I think really what it comes down to is being brave enough to trust yourself. Because even in this, I love how you're like, this shouldn't be alternative, even though it's viewed that way mostly. Um, there's a lot of voices and a lot of information to sift through, even in this world. And so I think trusting yourself is the ultimate medicine, because when you trust yourself, you can, you might not know what the future holds, but the next step will present itself. That's all you need to know to, and like that, taking that inspired action, like that is what the healing journey is. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. But really, like, the roadmap is like trusting that next step and being brave enough and loving yourself enough to take it. And that will get you everywhere, anywhere you need to go, anywhere you want to go. And if you have that desire for like a full, healthy life, that desire, that desire is valid. That desire is you knowing what you're capable of. Even if you're scared to want it, that desire, that authentic desire means it's out there for you. And I never would have guessed that, like a couple years ago, that I'd be traveling full time and have cancer. You'll surprise yourself, and that's probably the most fun part.
I love that. That's great. I so appreciate that. I think that's so true that when we have desire, that is the direction that we want to explore and go to. And that's the doorway that we get to walk through if we're brave enough. So thank you for bringing that up. And Lauren, where can people find you?
Yeah, so my website is laurenmeadowsweet.com. I'm Lauren, just at Lauren Meadowsweet on Instagram's my handle, and then I'm mostly on YouTube again, which my channel is called Lauren Meadowsweet. So very, very simple. If you Google me, all those things will pop up right away. There's not very many Lauren Meadowsweets, so however you want to approach that, I'm
Okay,
there
great.
in those.
Great, great.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And I will also put all of those links in the show notes. So be sure to look up Lauren, everybody. And thank you so much for joining me today, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Mary. This was such a great conversation, and I learned so much from you as well. So I
Well,
really
good.
appreciate this interaction, and I'm glad that we found each other.
I realize that what you've heard here is a radical departure from today's politically correct nutritional guidance. If it were politically correct, it would be endorsed by the media. And if it was endorsed by the media, it would be endorsed by Big Pharma. Let's face it, Big Pharma makes money when you and I stay sick. The real truth is, you can take control of your health with an intelligently designed plan. After helping people get keto adapted for over 25 years, I have found that everyone who succeeds does 3 very specific things. I've included all 3 in my book, How to Start a Keto Diet, and you can download your free copy at radicalhealthmakeover.com.